Great. Well, I figured I'd just put something on our calendar so we had a regular touch point since there's a lot of overlap between our two groups. And, I know we met a couple months ago, but I think it'll be good for us to just stay in sync. So that was really the purpose of this meeting. If, we don't need to have it 1 month, we can always just cancel, but I figured it would be a good thing just to keep on our calendars. Austin, it looked like you had a couple things to talk through, and one of them was actually the same as an agenda item I was going to put on. So I'm glad you put it on anyway.
Okay, cool. I was just trying to think back to our last conversation and some things related to security and compliance that have come up since then. So I was trying to throw some content into an empty agenda doc. So none of these are in a specific order, but since one of them stuck out to you, why don't we start with that one?
Okay, yeah. So 1B is the one that I was going to add. Is basically I figured it'd be good for us to just review our roadmap and where we're headed and make sure we're all in alignment on that. So maybe I'll just give a quick walkthrough again because showing is sometimes better than telling. But I know last time we talked, you probably remember this prototype.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what will show up under security and compliance policies. And what you're seeing right now is actually at the group level. So all of our work so far has been at the project level. But when we do start to implement group level policies, which is coming up on our roadmap, we're going to want to allow users to only apply these policies based off of their compliance framework label. So we're actually planning to use that compliance feature here to let users limit, which of the projects in the group get the policy applied to them. So for the first iteration, we're only supporting DAST and we're adding in secret detection as part of that. So for the first iteration, they'll write policies that look like this. So, if a pipeline is run for the main branch, then you won't have all of these options. But, DAST, you'll be able to require a DAST scan to run with these, site and scan profiles. And so again, instead of having this apply to all of the projects, in the entire group, they might want to say, well, I only care about having this policy for projects in the group that have the production label or, whatever other label. This would all map back to the compliance framework labels they had configured for the group.
Okay, cool.
I'm assuming for this, when I talked it over with Sam Kerr earlier, and unfortunately we did not record, but it seems like users would probably want some sort of like read-only view of this back when they look at their labels. Sam, I don't know if you have a good project set up. If not, I can just try to pull one up. They changed these menus.
I don't have a project set up. I can show a quick diagram of a project and group configuration that I had put together. And Sam White, I think you and I had walked through this as well. If I can screen share real quick.
Yeah, sure. So this one just doesn't have a compliance framework set up, but.
So this one, I just tried to model a hypothetical organization that has a root group, several subgroups with various projects with different compliance frameworks. One of the use cases we talked through is a compliance team member wants to make one change to make a single source of truth. They need to be able to have a preview of, if I select this policy or this framework, what happens, what gets applied across my organization. So like what Sam White was showing there with certain scan policies only apply to certain labels, what happens if I select this label? What policies am I opted into? Because one of the things we've learned since we released compliance frameworks is that they are generated at the root group and applied selectively throughout the organization rather than just defined in one group and only used in one group. This is kind of a visualization of that to keep in mind.
Got it.
Do you have a project with a compliance framework set up that's easy to demo?
Yeah.
Yes. So I'll send you the Express example in the Zoom chat. That is my go-to development project. And then the compliance project that I also just dropped the link into is the corresponding compliance team's project.
Got it.
In your case, I think the compliance project is where all the policy objects would be stored as well.
Right. And I don't have the permissions on this, so I don't get the settings tab for the group level. So I don't actually see those compliance framework levels at the moment. But
I can do a screen share, and I'll also add you as a member just so you can do whatever you like. But please don't break it because I do use it for customer demos.
Yeah, it should be here where you go to manage those labels.
Or if you break it, at least put it back, because I've definitely broken it several times and put it back.
I'll do my best
I know.
to not break it.
I was assuming Sam's getting a bunch of emails from me, but I knew he didn't read. He said he doesn't read emails, so I was hoping he wouldn't see a bunch of to-dos like, "Hey, your pipeline failed in the compliance project."
Yeah, so like in here when they go to edit these or create a new one, I guess, but more editing, it seems like, you know, in here would be good for them to see some sort of list of what policies are using those compliance framework labels.
So like
it could be there. Maybe even more context specific would be when you're applying the framework to a project. Currently today, when you're looking at a list, like let's just say there were 17 frameworks available in GitLab org, and you want to apply a framework to GitLab, the project, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if that framework has a pipeline compliance configured. You don't know if it's going to have policies configured behind it. We're looking at enforcing different settings and rule sets in the configuration itself. So I think one of our short-term visions for helping clarify what compliance frameworks are doing is even showing at your project view when you're going to apply this thing, be aware it's going to come with this, and this, and this, so that you have a little bit of awareness. Right now, I think because the people that create the frameworks are really the ones that can apply them, there's going to be some overlap of knowing that functionality inherently. But with that said, introducing it as like a mechanism for creating policies is a new, unique attribute. So
yeah, I agree. I think that would be the best place to show that, is like when you're applying it to the project. So if you when you go to apply this to the project, you're able to see which policies will then take effect. I guess the other area that I wanted to sync up on was, you know, after we move that to the group level and start using those compliance framework labels, based off of our previous discussion, I was understanding that, like Sam, for a second, if you go back to that edit screen for the compliance framework, yeah, so here where it says compliance pipeline configuration location, as I see it, our vision would be to actually remove that from here entirely. So you wouldn't, you could still connect a compliance framework label to a compliance pipeline, but you would no longer do that on this screen. Instead, you would create a security policy that requires that pipeline to run when the pipeline is run.
And then there would be something here to link you into whatever that policy editor looks like to tie this together, presumably.
Or I guess Austin's suggesting that maybe you don't show that here and instead you show that when you're applying the label to a project. But
yeah, I mean, they're different, I guess you could call them personas, but there are different tasks to be upheld here. Like one is creating this unique framework attribute and then creating settings off of it. I think the initial vision for compliance frameworks was they would become like this single source of truth that you could create these sensible defaults and enforcements for projects. Inevitably, you're not going to be able to do everything in this form, but we can use these frameworks to drive the power of it. So yeah, today there's an input field to specify where that file lives, but perhaps we can create other call to actions to encourage users that if they want to set up these things in other places, they can. I like Sam's idea. Dang it, you're both Sam.
W and K.
I like Kerr's idea to like create some sort of call to action to let you know like there are other ways that you can extend this framework to be more than just a pretty label that appears in UI. Like there's a way to set up pipeline compliance. There's a way to set up a unique policy. I guess the thing that I would like to better understand is what would that look like? How would you refer to that file in the policy itself? So in this exact example, if we're going to not use that field anymore, where would you put the reference in?
So we talked about this like 2 or 3 months ago when we met last, but I don't expect you to remember it, so I'll show it to you again. That would show up here when you're creating the policy. So you go in, you create a new security policy, and instead of requiring a scan, you would require a CI script to be run as part of that pipeline. So you could either put a linked file, or actually to make it even easier on the users, they could just type in a block of CI YAML to run either way. But that would accomplish the same net result, but in this UI. So that way there's, only one place that they go to set up what that compliance framework label does, would be in the policy UI. And maybe we reference them over here, from the label creation, but that would be the idea, is that YAML, that reference field would move over here in the setup UI.
Got it. The one thing that would kind of scare me about it is because of how impactful the compliance pipeline can be. If they don't pick a specific framework for it to go to, it could wreak havoc on that group. So that would be the biggest thing that would be my concern, is like if you weren't selecting which one it needed to go to.
Like if you just had a projects.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess you do have to select something that makes it more prescriptive.
Well, so there is a slight difference, is my understanding, on how the policy pipelines work versus compliance pipelines today. And Sam White, correct me on this, but what Sam's showing right now, this will be appended to an existing pipeline configuration, as opposed to our current compliance pipelines are, you run the compliance pipeline full stop.
I think we would want to, Sam, I think we'd want to keep yours running the way it runs today. And we probably would just need to make that more clear here in the UI, which things are running as separate processes and which things are being merged in. Because right now we don't provide any language to make that clear, but I don't think we would want to change the behavior of what you're doing. I think we would just need to make it more clear in the UI.
Well, so is that we don't want to change it just for backwards compatibility, or even in the long run, infinite time, infinite resources, you still wouldn't want to change it to do the appending?
I mean, I guess that's more of a question for you, since it was a compliance driven requirement that caused you to build this feature in the first place. But it seems to me like for compliance purposes, they're more likely to want to have their YAML file merged in, as opposed to run separately at the end of everything. But we could do it either way, actually, if you prefer to just have it run as an independent, totally independent of what's in the developer's project CI YAML file, we could do that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think they're two slightly different use cases. Whether you want to do hard enforcement of everything versus just always tacking something on at the end.
And that could even, in the future, that could be an option as part of the setup. That could be another drop-down field here where you pick, does this CI file get merged in and run, or does this get run independently?
I think the thing Sam Kerr has helped me better understand is the file in which the compliance pipeline is built is actually what is run. It's going to merge in the project's unique YAML file if it's included into the compliance pipeline. So it's almost like it doesn't matter what is written at the project level. The compliance pipeline is what's run. if the compliance team chooses to allow you to run your own pipeline, they can include it. But it's almost as though it's not running merge with, it's going to run only that file unless it includes the projects. And Sam, you could show that example in your compliance project YAML file, has that include if we needed to hash that out. But
No,
that's
that
like the
makes
one
sense.
unique attribute about it.
At least for the first iteration, I would not expect us to change the behavior of how that's running today. I think we would just add verbiage here to clarify what's happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. If that's the case, we would need to dig in a little bit on how we would want to allow people to apply compliance framework labels in that case, because you would not be able to apply multiple. Because if a SOX framework applied one compliance pipeline and a SAMS framework applied a different one, we would have no way to merge those two together. So that would just be in detail we would need to hash out for using the existing compliance pipeline functionality.
How do you handle that today?
You only get one. You get one framework and that's it.
Got it. Yeah, because in this world, you could apply multiple frameworks, right? So
yeah.
I guess you're saying
so that
takes precedence.
Yeah, so that goes back to, I guess they're really two different use cases and we could just provide both. I don't know if we necessarily have to force one of them onto a user, other than we've already built one of them, so we don't need to remove it necessarily.
Yeah, that is true. I do think that they could coexist.
Mm-hmm. One thing I've been reading about a lot lately are the cascading project settings and the framework we have around those. Have we talked about how that would interact with security scan policies? Or is that something you all have considered?
Yeah, so I've been sort of keeping an eye on it. I mean, my engineering team is still doing everything at the project level because we're just trying to get a lot of the underlying scaffolding in place to even support security policies. So we haven't like really dug into that deep yet. From the limited bit that we have looked into it, it seems like the cascading settings framework that's there is not going to work for security policies. But if we can leverage it, we will.
From a use case perspective, is that something you all would want to support? Like being able to say at the group level, policy X, then project level under it, either use it as defaults or enforce you can't extend from it?
Yeah, so I think we still want to, from a use case perspective, we do still want to have that same cascading effect where, you should be able to go into the project and see a list of all of the policies that are applied to that project, whether they're created at the group level or workspace level or at the project level. And probably that's just a column in your list of policies that says, this is a group level policy, go edit it at the group level. When it comes to time to enforce the policies generally tend to be additive. So it's not like we're overriding anything. We're just creating a list of all of the policies that get enforced for a particular project.
Right. Makes sense.
Are the policies meant to only be driven around like YAML files, or are there other extensions that can be done? So maybe not instead of a policy for your pipelines, but a policy for your MR approvals.
Yes. Yep. We are planning that too. So just to come back here, by the way, as part of this, so we also let you schedule these. So that would be another benefit of moving to this UI is you can now, instead of just having it run as part of the pipeline, you can have it run on a given schedule. But this is only a scan execution policy. So we are planning to build scan results policies. And these kick in after the scans finish. And we're planning, so as far as requiring approvals, we're actually going to replace the current experience with this one, which gives you just a lot more options than what's in there today. So you can get really specific about how many vulnerabilities should trigger the approval, which branches, if they're newly detected or not. Whereas right now we trigger the approval if any critical or high vulnerabilities are detected. So I guess this is specific to security approvals, not MR approvals in general, but we are planning to move that into this UI since it's a security related policy. And again, we're hoping to leverage at the group level, we're hoping to leverage the compliance framework labels here as well.
Have we talked through what the sort of permissions will be required for changing these policies yet?
Yeah, so all of these policies boil down to YAML that gets stored very much like your compliance project. It gets stored in a separate repository so the customer can set up their own permissions on that to govern who can edit these and put it all through a two-step approval process if they want to. So saving one of these policies actually auto generates an MR back into that security policy project.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm thinking about establishing that link between like a developer project and the security policy project, though. Who has access rights to make those sort of connections?
At the moment, I think we set it up as any maintainer on the project, but that was probably a mistake. We need to update that so it's limited to only owners of the project.
Yeah, because one of the things we've learned from a lot of the compliance frameworks is that many of our customers give maintainer access to everyone because the CI pipeline variables feature is tied to maintainers. So like AWS tokens, API keys, that sort of thing. And then they've also shared the feedback that I, as a manager, am worried one of my employees will disable the setting, do something, and then re-enable it.
Right.
So good to hear you're thinking about moving that to owner
Yeah,
instead of
that should be owners only. And same thing for group level policies. It should be the owner of the group only.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
So yeah, at this moment, it's not that way, but that's something we need to fix.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still behind a feature flag, which is nice. So it's not like it's a breaking change to adjust that.
Yeah, it's still in development. So
right.
no need.
Well, we are about at time. Are there any other areas that we want to sync up on?
Probably good for this month. From the compliance group side of the house, we're working through some bugs and some small refinements on compliance frameworks, but nothing that's going to make a major change to how users interact with them. Just more refinements about what we intended and released initially.
Sounds good. And on my end, I'll drop this link in the notes document too, but it's probably worth just sharing. We keep our priorities, like a prioritized list of our roadmap, as an issue that's always open in GitLab. And so just glancing through here, we're working right now on allowing users to edit the policies in the policy UI. So like right now, the UI experience is pretty poor. It's practically non-existent, which is why it's behind a feature flag. This should actually say 14.1. So we're planning to release that in 14.1 and turn the feature flag on. This one doesn't apply to you. After that, we're planning to extend it by adding support for secret detection and SAST. Those should be fairly small level of effort type things. And then after that, we're planning to move it up to the group level where it's at the project level only right now. And then down here, we plan to add support for compliance pipelines. So I don't have an epic created for that yet, but just to give you a rough notional idea of like our priorities and where some of these things fall.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful.
Great. Well, thanks for syncing up today, and we'll talk again next month.
Sounds good. See ya.